Welcome to Trek Speak, the video podcast on iTunes and also at trekspeak.com. Now, continuing the series on Star Trek fan films, when I first started speaking with fan film makers, I never even considered the possibility that somebody out there could be making animated Star Trek, not least fully CGI animated Star Trek. Indeed, I came across such a project and was blown away by the episode that is available on Vimeo.com of Star Trek Aurora. And right now I've got the creator and, well, pretty much everything behind the technical aspect of Star Trek Aurora is with Tim Vining. Tim, hello to you. How are you keeping?
Good, I'm doing very well.
Excellent. So really, it's amazing to me, having been a big fan of Star Trek, the animated series, from quite a while back, to know that it's now possible for people at home to create such high-end animation as you've had yourself. Do you actually have a background in design and art? I mean, what led you to even having the skills to be able to create this in the first place?
Well, I am a trained artist. I went to art school. I was always, drew stuff when I was a kid and everything, like comic books, like animation. Watched the animated series as well, and always been interested in animation. So, but it wasn't really until just recently, in the last couple of years, that, like you were saying, someone at home could do an entire animated, episode just by themselves. It was, it was impossible. I had thought about doing just traditional animation years ago. I was like, fooled around with like drawing and stuff like that, and I realized, okay, there's no way I can draw like 24 frames a second for an hour on end.
Exactly. Now, of course, CGI lends itself to such an endless realm of possibilities. There's just literally no bounds to where you can take the characters, and to actually begin to even think about creating an anime show, to me, it boggles the mind. I mean, what made you decide, right, I'm going to go in this direction? And of course, we will talk about the plot and the characters of the Star Trek Aurora show. How do you kind of pinpoint, right, my imagination needs to go here and not this far, if you like?
Well, I mean, in terms of going with animation, it was really pretty much the only thing that I had the ability to do, but I was also interested in. I mean, honestly, you were saying that, when you were looking into fan films, you were surprised that somebody would do an animated one. Honestly, when I started Star Trek Aurora, I didn't know anyone was doing fan films. I mean, I thought, ooh, hey, I'm going to do this thing, and nobody else is doing this. Nobody else has thought of this.
Right.
So I was kind of surprised. Honestly, I went like about, I don't know, maybe like 5 or 6 months into the project before I realized that there were other fan films out there.
Okay, yeah. And of course, there are others, aren't there? And they've all had their own little take on the Star Trek universe. Of course, we start off and we see characters that are quite different than the standard Starfleet characters in uniform that we might expect from a Star Trek series. These characters they're part of Starfleet, or are they their own sort of division, if you like?
Well, they're just merchanters, as I call them. People just out there, just like truck drivers or shippers and that sort of thing. Because I mean, still commerce going on. I mean, and the Star Trek alluded to that in the from the original show on. You would have like they would visit a planet and there'd be like the miners, on the different planets, or they would run across people who are running cargo and stuff like that in a different series. And so this was always out there, but it was never really the focus of this, Star Trek, which was always focused on Starfleet. And I was really intrigued. I remember even as a little kid watching the original Star Trek, I thought, all right, because one thing, these guys out there, like they're on a big starship, with all kinds of weapons and stuff like that, and it's a military-ish type of thing, and so they're out there in a big crew. But when you would see just the civilians running around the same universe, I thought, man, how did they get out there? What's their story? I always thought that was really intriguing. What was behind them? Because we're going boldly going where they've never gone before, but there's some people already out there who are just like on their own.
Absolutely. There's always been sort of layers of views of normal civilian people in amongst Star Trek episodes. I think back to maybe even the Next Generation, where you'd see people who weren't maybe part of the crew, and I have to say it's true, you would always wonder what kind of part did they play in the universe. And as you say, these Starfleet miners, or these miners that are in your show, I suppose, is it set in the original series timeline? Is that where it's based?
Yes, it's set pretty much right after the original Star Trek. And like some of the flashback scenes are probably maybe a little bit before the time. So it's around right around there. So like that's where you'll see that in the episode that you'll see the original series uniforms and ships and stuff like that. So it's definitely set in that time period.
Now, of course, your main character, who is really an incredible looking model, if you like, it would be so difficult to be able to go and cast people for this kind of a show, wouldn't it? And of course, you've now got the ability to create the show as you see fit. I suppose, talking about the characters, can you tell me some of the main principles involved?
I'm sorry, in terms of creating a character?
Well, the actual characters themselves in the show. I mean, who are the leads and whose story are we following?
Well, mostly we're following a character named Kara Carpenter. She's her family for a long time has been merchanters, shipping cargo, running cargo in their ships, and as you'll see early on in the show, there's a tragedy that she loses her family, and sort of that's kind of the basis for the character. A lot of her motivation behind her is that experience, and then we sort of follow through a storyline that explores that and takes that into account.
Absolutely. I certainly will try as well not to reveal anything about the story. Of course, the whole point would be that people check out the show, as many thousands already have. I know you have quite a few views on Vimeo. It's been a tremendous success so far. And of course, the characters, I do maybe even just get this wrong, but I predict, is there some kind of Irish origin there? Because you see the red hair, and I think that the father of Cara and Cara herself, it looks quite red hair and maybe a bit Irish there.
It's very possible. I was brought up Irish, as it were. My mother is Irish,
right.
from years back, and so I maybe have an Irish sensibility.
This is it, indeed. I did see that, and I wondered, was there an Irish connection? I really enjoyed how the family life was painted in the beginning, and again, as I say, not revealing too much, but how it all ties in. It's just so excellently well written. And I mean, on top of having created all of this animation and designing these characters, I mean, in terms of the technical side, that's one thing. Then, of course, you have the human element of bringing the voice actors in. It was a lot of work to do.
Yeah, it was a fair amount. I mean, it took me. I thought it took me 5 years, but I realized when I was looking back at some of my old files, it took me 6 years to finish this project. Wow. So it was a while.
Absolutely. Because I was kind of lucky in a sense to be able to click onto the website and see the entire 55-minute, just under an hour movie that's up there. And of course, at one point it was actually coming out episode by episode, wasn't it? So it just kind of shows people that it was taking a bit of time to do each segment.
Yes, I spent a lot of time apologizing to my fans who were following me in how long it was taking to come out. But it's animation is a very slow process, especially for one person. So it did take a while. But I also had to bring it out in pieces like I did, simply because I couldn't have gone 6 years without a little bit of feedback to know if people were even interested in this. And fortunately, I got a lot of really good feedback even from the start. So it was the sort of thing that kind of kept me going.
Indeed, it's certainly the type of thing you need, isn't it, when you're creating anything, to get that bit of feedback. And it certainly makes sense to me what you say, that needing that ongoing kind of dialogue with the fans is very important. I think, again, it's such a huge project, and I kind of really felt that animation of that quality really was in the realm of a Disney, a Pixar, places like that. I suppose, what has changed in the last 5 to 10 years that has sort of brought this technology to the home user, if you like, and has kind of allowed you to create that sort of animation now?
Well, mostly, I mean, I think for the home user, I mean, just the price of everything has come down so much. I mean, like the techniques and the power that you could have um, in software now, I mean, was something that used to take, tons of computers, and it cost millions of dollars to develop. In fact, a lot of a lot of the software was developed for movies. And, if you look back even just, like I said, 5 or 10 years, you'll see stuff you can do on your desktop that was state of the art just that long ago. So it's pretty amazing.
It certainly is. I mean, that's another point, isn't it? That when you have a situation now where you can actually surpass what was done, maybe even just 10, 15 years ago at this point, when you look back at some of the animated cartoons and things that were so huge and so top class at the time. I suppose referring briefly to the animated series of Star Trek, the one from the 70s, did that have any kind of inspiration, or did you ever even see that back in the day?
Oh yeah, yeah. I watched them all when I was a kid. I mean, that I loved those, and it was really pretty amazing when you think about it now. Is it most of the voice work was done by the original cast, and a lot of the episodes are written and produced by the same people. So it's even though I think a lot of it, I mean, there's always with the technical people, whether or not all of everything that's in there is canon or not. It's pretty much follows the real deal. So it was. I've actually watched some of them more recently, and they're actually better than I thought they were going to be. I mean, the storylines, you're watching some of them, and it's stuff you wouldn't even get away with today. I mean, you have like Scotty getting drunk at one point and singing. He says you can't do that on Saturday morning cartoons now.
Absolutely. It's a very good point, and very much so that they had that just carte blanche to do things like that, didn't they? From what I heard, it was in a sense sort of aimed slightly towards the adult audience that was missing it on live action as a TV series, and they had proper Trek writers involved. I believe Joe Trimble was one of those people that was writing scripts, and I think even scripts maybe from the original series or possibly Phase 2 made it in there. So I suppose it does kind of vouch for the writing, if you like. And again, that would be the thing about the animated series that a lot of people always say, that it had that quality writing. And I certainly feel that echoed with Aurora. You talked a bit about the flashbacks and the various scenes in Star Trek Aurora that's out there now. I suppose trying to do all of the various aspects of the production and then thinking about the writing. What part does that come in? Do you have to kind of write the story first and go, right, I'll now fit this animation to that?
The story began with the story first. Certainly, because I mean, I really consider myself more, even though I'm an illustrator, but in the terms of the animation, I sort of feel like my strongest suit there is the writing. I'm not, that's what I feel. Yeah. Sorry, I don't want to sound too conceited to say that, but for me, or I should say, that's the most important thing for me. I was really in Aurora. I was trying to tell the story. Whether it was animated or not animated, that was really secondary to what I was really trying to do here. Animation, like I said, was something I was interested in anyway, but also it was the only thing that was really possible for me on such a small scale. Now, obviously, you can see that a lot of the fan films that are done live action, they take a large crew. There's all the cameras and lighting. There's costumes. There's several actors. There's a lot of work, sets, all the stuff like that, and that's a whole different ball game. Now, for me, doing it animated, I was able to create sets just on the computer. So rather than spending a month building a bridge, I could spend a couple days building one virtually. So so doing it that way made it more possible. But getting back to writing the story, when I wrote it, I was also aware of that it would be animated. And to be honest, one of the reasons that I thought of doing Star Trek is, honestly, a lot of Star Trek is there's a lot of standing around and talking, sitting around and talking, and walking and talking, because there's since a lot of it's the sort of science fiction, they're talking about things and explaining things. There's a lot of time spent doing that, and I thought that will probably be easier to animate than trying to do, like, say, if I want to do some sort of like a fantasy sword epic where it's all running around and movement and stuff like that. So I thought, especially starting out, where this was my first animated attempt, I thought I better do something that might be a little simpler. Also, having just the small ship with the two main characters, again, that's a lot easier to animate two characters than animate, an entire bridge full of like 20 characters. So, yeah, so the writing was written for the story, or as to say, the writing was written for it being animated in the way that it was. So, yeah, I was conscious when I wrote it that I had to animate it. So the scenes that I wrote, I made sure that I didn't have 50 people in them.
Of course, yeah. Again, these would be the things as a non-animator you wouldn't even think about, that I have to think about 50 people moving in a different direction. And
Right.
you kind of start to understand then, it makes more sense to me that you have to kind of scale back and to keep it at a level that it's manageable. Of course, often these animated series, particularly, I couldn't even talk for CGI, but even animated series on traditional cells, they would have had, 50, 100 drawers. I mean, wouldn't they? I mean, there'd be people all over the place submitting drawings. Like, how would a Hollywood CGI production work? Would there be many dozens of animators, perhaps?
Yeah, you would have a lot more people because in a professional production, you have people who specialize. So you'll have people who they'll animate the characters, but then you'll have people who do nothing but hair, for example. There's people who do nothing but the lighting, or they do the sets, or some people who do nothing but effects. I mean that's true also. Also even traditional animation, you'll have, like, in the Disney cell animated films, you'll have people who, like, they do the bubbles in the water, things like that. They
Right.
don't ever actually animate the characters themselves. So there's a lot of people who are involved in that. And plus, also, you'd have different people doing the sound. You have different people recording the voices. You have different people directing that. So yeah. So I mean, if you look at watch any of the animated movies out there and just look at how many people are involved in production afterwards. It's a lot of people. So, but that said, it's the fact that when you look at that even one person could do that. Okay, even taking 6 years. But on the other hand, I always thought, if there were six of me, I could have done it 1 year, right?
Right, it's a good attitude, you touched a bit on the fact that you, in a sense, you would have, I suppose, an interest in doing fan films, but it's more possible for you to animate a scene and to create it like that. I certainly felt from watching Aurora that there were some really nice camera angles in there, almost a verite style for some of the scenes where you could see the cars passing by as the two characters talked. I noticed little touches like that, and it certainly feels like, there's a filmmaker behind it, if you like, kind of setting up the shots. And I suppose, do you have kind of directorial aspirations as well? Would you ever consider a live action film?
I would, actually. I mean, I have a background in video, even though, like I said, I went to art school, but one of my first jobs was doing training films, training videos. So you learn a lot about cameras, angles, and lighting and things like that. So I got sort of a sense for that. But also, truthfully, 3D animation is actually a lot like traditional filming, because unlike a cell animation where you're just drawing and it's flat and you have backgrounds and things like that, with 3D animation, you actually have a camera. I mean, and you change the angles, you change the lighting, you move the characters, you have them put over here rather than over there, you make the sets, but everything is actually very much like filming. In fact, it's kind of funny. In my old job, I had never done really much of the camera work, so I wasn't really versed in that. But then after doing Aurora for a couple of years in my new job that I've got, my current job, we had to film something. And as I was setting it up and I was setting up angles, I realized that almost everything I'd learned about my camera work, I had learned on Aurora. It was exactly the same skills.
Right, right. That's fascinating to think that it actually came to that, where you had learned from the animation and just being in that program, creating the various scenes. I suppose, is that kind of control element to be able to literally create what's in your mind's eye? It must be a real freeing thing to be able to do that and to let your imagination run wild. Again, like, I've enjoyed watching Aurora because I've seen it twice now actually, and I've noticed so many people have actually mentioned it to me. People have mentioned it in comments, and can you talk to Tim who did Star Trek Aurora? It's certainly got a lot of fan interest. Going on from this first project, would there be another Aurora planned at some point?
I think so. I don't think it's going to be the next thing I'm working on. Presently I'm actually working on illustrating a science fiction story I wrote some time ago that I'd always wanted to illustrate it. And I also, with the iBooks, the new iPad iBooks, have the ability to put illustrations into a text and also have animations and things like that. So I haven't totally mapped it out, but I thought I would try something like that and see where I can take that. But then in the future, yes, I definitely do have other Aurora stories in mind, and they're sort of jotted down in the plots and things like that. So I think I will come back to it. I mean, it's certainly in my mind.
Now remember what I said: if anybody messes with us. If they insult us, insult their ship. If they push us, shove back harder.
Good girl. You have to stand up for yourself out here. You'll be fighting every punk in the sector who thinks you're an easy target.
So it is a social order based upon reprisal and revenge.
Xenerians call it justice.
Captain, we could simply drink on Aurora.
What fun is that? Soak in the atmosphere. Enjoy the company.
I think it's like a lot of these fan films. I mean, they really generate so much interest because being at a time where we don't have a TV series on the air and we kind of have to wait years between movies, and some people are going to enjoy it, maybe some people don't like it so much. It's almost the fans now and people like yourself who are keeping it going and keeping us with material to watch. And again, as I say, such high quality material, I can't put it over enough. I refer to it like as being one long visual effect. And again, to get back to that time that it actually took, I mean, to get to people, the idea of how much each little piece takes, is it a matter of layering different layers on top of each other and creating each layer as it goes? How much does each piece take? Would you have to work on it design-wise? And I suppose I'm trying to get a grasp on the time that it takes, really.
Well, I mean, it's more like it's not so much layered. It is, like I said, it's a lot like filming traditionally, because I have to make a set and I have to light it so it looks right. So I'm putting lights in there and I'm setting the cameras up, and then I animate the characters, and then I set them up so they walk in front of the camera correctly and things like that. Setting up where their eyes are looking, make so they look like they're talking to each other. But there's a lot of like pieces to the whole thing. For example, the animation part is done in one program, and then I import. I won't get too technical here, but you import the moves basically into another program, the program where I render the stuff, where also the sets are at, and also the characters there. So you basically create the animation, you take the moves, you put them basically. They're almost like. It's almost like the characters are almost like robots in a way, because you have to essentially, you're programming them to work and move in a certain way, and you're filming it on a set. So that's essentially the best analogy I can think of.
You've explained it very well from what was a vague question from myself, because again, it's the magic of animation, isn't it, that still baffles when you don't know the process. At times it's something like magic that you just almost, in a sense, you don't want to know, but in one way it's interesting to see how it's formed up, and it kind of gets me thinking about the possibilities of that it has. And again, it's another realm of video editing that perhaps I don't know anything about, so maybe I should try and find out. But certainly I'm talking to the right man for that. And indeed, I want to just remind people as well that the full Star Trek Aurora is up there on Vimeo.com. I know the entire fan film community have seen it. Like at this point, I know a lot of people, as I say, have mentioned it to me. One of the things I noticed again is the voice acting is very, very high standard. Now, I feel like when you were watching a live action fan film, sometimes when I'm showing them to people who maybe don't have as much patience and are kind of expecting a big movie of some kind, the thing that's make or break is the actual visual effects for the live action. Would you say that for an animated series that in fact maybe even the voice acting can be that important, that it can kind of, you know, make people decide on how they think about it and how they feel about it?
I think it's probably one of the most important parts of animation. I think is the voice acting, and I think it's the least appreciated part too. Because I think it's like if you're doing it correctly, you don't notice it. I think that's really what happens. Because I think people forget about the voice acting as acting because you don't see the person doing it.
Right.
You're seeing the character, and if you're believing the character and following the story and following the plot, a lot of times that the voice actor is invisible. But I really think that it's one of the most important parts of it. And you talk about high quality. I definitely appreciate my wife who does the voices of the main characters. I think did a great job, and friends and family who pitched in also did a really nice job, and I really appreciate all the work they put into it because I think like you said, it is make or break.
Indeed, of course, those are your extra cast members, all those voices that feature in the series. I found other animated films, and I wonder if you had any comment on the animated Farragut series, or if you ever got a chance to see that.
I did actually. It was a lot like the old Filmation original Star Trek series, and I thought that was a clever use of the old style, and especially with the the old arched eyebrows and everything like that, and the way that people moved and everything. So I thought that was cleverly done.
Absolutely. Again, it just reminded me of the animated series. And again, maybe I have said it, but I did feel that the animated series was so underappreciated, and I would consider it the sixth TV series. I mean, it's, as you say, is it canon or is it not? Would you consider it canon if you were pushed on that issue?
I would. I mean, I can't be the person to say that. I mean, I think because that's I would probably start a big argument with
I know
the technical people.
You're right, definitely. It's hard to say, isn't it? And I think again, it's just that quality of storytelling that always stands out. I think we're always appreciative of animated versions of Star Trek. I mean, they are thin on the ground. I often hear of talk of, well, this company is going to possibly bring something together and they might have a bit of Paramount, CBS backing, but it never quite seems to come into fruition. Do you think if it did happen that they put on maybe a Cartoon Network Star Trek animated show from today, do you think that would be a good thing for the fandom in general and maybe get some more people interested at a young age now?
I think they could give it a try. I don't know if you've watched any of the Star Wars Clone Wars, but I watched those and I enjoyed them a lot. And I think they're very well done, and they can tell some really good stories with those characters. And I think that something done with Star Trek in a similar fashion, I think could be very successful. I mean, and certainly I think it's, well, I'm not really sure. I mean, depending, I don't know how much of it would cost less or more or what, but I think it's certainly possible they could do something like that, and I think it could be successful. I mean, it'd be worth a try.
Certainly. I think they need to try for sure. Again, like I've been hugely encouraged in a positive way, having seen so many animated series out there. I think one of you guys should actually be commissioned, you know, why not? And let's get that on network TV, because I think it would certainly be a real winning show formula. Of course, these days a lot of the animation on even some of the children's networks, it is CGI based, so it's kind of moving towards that more than ever now, isn't it?
Well, I think people are. I mean, the early stuff I think was not as good as it is now. Obviously, a lot of techniques have come a long way. I think also people are getting used to the look of it as well as I think they're also starting to learn the proper amount of realism they can or cannot get away with. I mean, you know, for some of the stuff that they've done in the past, people have complained that it's too creepy looking, where the characters are almost they're so realistic, but not realistic enough. It's what they call the uncanny valley, and they fall into that. And I'm hoping that Aurora doesn't fall into that too much. I mean, I sort of tried to keep things not 100% realistic looking. I'd pump up the colors a bit, and using the colors of like the type of like eyes I use, for example, aren't exactly realistic. They look a little more doll-ish, like not quite real. So things like that to keep it away from that that valley, as they say.
Absolutely. I must mention as well the music and the soundtrack. Very rare it is, I think, to see or at least hear Star Trek audio music in the background that has vocals. You've actually recorded vocals. There's a song which, of course, it harks back to, didn't the original series team apparently originally have vocals as well? So I think you're on good ground there with that connection, you know?
Well, but that was my wife singing that song as well. So she's very much a part of this project, and I couldn't have done it without her.
Excellent. Well, again, we've really gotten right to the heart, I think, of a lot of the creation of the animation, and sort of had an idea of some of the kind of things that you run into. Do you actually ever experience dramatic production problems? Is there ever a disaster where, something goes wrong, or is it something that you can kind of sort of keep going over time and nothing ever too bad happens, if you like?
Well, with animation, you have more control over the process. I think that's one of the advantages of it. Certainly, also being the only chief cook and bottle washer, doing all the parts myself, more or less. I have a lot more control. So if something's not working, I can just can it. It's that, or because if you're having somebody else do something, or if you have a lot more people involved, then it becomes a little more problematic. So in terms of disasters, well, the biggest disaster I had one time was in later parts of the show. I used motion capture, and people, if you kind of watch it, you'll see that the realism of the movements changes a little bit. Also, as I learned as I went along, but I actually had what point was that at? Maybe after I had released part 4. I had lightning strike near my house, and it fried almost all my electronics in my house,
right,
including my computer screen and the motion capture cameras.
Yeah,
so that's probably the biggest disaster I had.
Again, it's exactly the kind of thing I was thinking is possible, of course, with everything existing on hard drives and computers. I suppose even with the video side of things, you might have the backup of the tape. But I suppose, as you say, that is the digital world, isn't it? That, again, I've spent so many times over the last few weeks trying to buy hard drives, storing everything, I think it's going to become more of a problem as the years go by with digital storage. But again, that's another issue altogether. I've found, again, several animated series, and I think people should certainly go out and check out all that's available. 100% to check out Vimeo.com, Star Trek Aurora. Now, you have your own website which houses everything. Is that Star Trek, staurora.com?
Yeah, it's auroratrek.com.
auroratrek.com. We'll put that address up. And again, you can get all the downloads, wallpapers, and lots of other information there about the series. And again, this wrapped for you, was it a few months back that you'd finished up and put the last part up?
Yes, it was last November is when I put the last part up. And it was with great relief that I was able to finish it, because there were some. I mean, after in the 6 years that I was working on it, there were some pretty dark times when I thought, okay, this is too much work. But like I said earlier, it was really the fans that would keep me going. I mean, I would go along and I'd go for a while and I'd feel, ugh. And then I get an email from somebody telling me that how much they've enjoyed it, and they want to discuss it a little bit and something like this. And that interest really kept me going.
That's the best I can get it without cooling the assembly. Let me know if it goes beyond 20%.
Like I say, we're just can't afford anything. Crazy, critical diagnosis. Okay, now that's all the part I can stand for. Unknown ship, please identify yourself. You're the first vessel Mercury Rising registered identified.
What's happening up there?
Hold on, Captain.
Sarah. Impulse to full power now. Heading 10, Mark 3.
Jimmy, I'm giving you 1 minute of full power. Take a full EM sweep of that ship.
They're charging their weapon!
Unknown ship, hold your fire. We are a merchant vessel, unarmed. Repeat, your fire.
Shields to maximum. Everybody brace for impact. Kids.
I was going to ask, do you go back a long way in terms of being a Star Trek fan?
Oh yeah, I mean, from let's see, 66 is when it came out, I guess. So I was I was 4 years old.
Right. Yeah.
So so we watched it, because I have a large family. There's seven of us kids, and we would used to sit down in front of the TV and watch it, whenever it was on every week. So we were all fans. So it's certainly one of my early memories was watching Star Trek and having fun with that. And we'd actually in the 70s, I'd actually saw Gene Roddenberry. He gave a talk at a college that was near where I lived.
Oh, right.
And that was really interesting. And he brought the blooper reel and he talked about it, and it was really, I was about to say fascinating, but it was fascinating to see, because there were a lot of people there. I mean, the auditorium was crammed with people, and there was just so much interest and so much excitement about it. And you mentioned the animated film, the animated show. Actually, one college student stood up. He's probably in his early 20s and stuff, and he was a little embarrassed, but he said, he had a question about the animated series to Gene Roddenberry. He says, kind of saying sheepishly, well, I watched the series, but and he had a question about one of the plot points. But it was interesting because here he was a little embarrassed, but it was like you said, they were good stories.
Absolutely. It's fascinating to hear you talk about that era because, again, not being around for the original run, probably I came in more around the Next Generation, probably a couple of seasons in, I never got the sense of how big the original series was back then. I mean, particularly in the States where you are, I mean, it was a huge, huge deal when this was on in the first place, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I mean, and I was just discussing with my wife earlier about back then you only had like 3 major networks. So when something was on, basically you had 3 choices what to watch in any time slot. So the actual numbers of people who watched that were pretty big. But as people have read over the years, the studio, for one reason or another, put it in a really bad time slot and moved it around, and it was just it lost its audience simply because of where it was at. And then, lo and behold, a couple of years later, when it's in syndication, it becomes this huge thing. So, I mean, it's happened in other things also, where sometimes a network doesn't know what it has until later on. I mean, you've even seen them, like, they'll bring things back because the audience reaction, now these days, when you get it in DVD, they'll realize, oh, people really did like this.
That's right. They realise what they missed. I felt like there was somewhat of a missed opportunity in terms of maybe merchandising for the last movie. There was a lot of key merchandise that they almost felt, well, is it going to be a success or is it not? And things like the Star Trek Experience had closed down a few years before, and suddenly then we had this massive blockbuster movie. What are your thoughts on the Star Trek 2009 movie and J.J. Abrams' involvement in the franchise now?
Well, I'm kind of mixed. I think like a lot of people. I would have liked to have seen it follow more of the canon, because I mean certainly they changed, a lot in terms of the timeline, and I think you really sort of have to look at it as an alternate universe. I mean that's the way I see it, because I mean it's like honestly, I saw the movie and I enjoyed the movie as a movie, but afterwards the more I thought about it, the more, or I should say the less that I liked it, because I was thinking, wait a minute. They did this, they did that, they changed that, and for a while there I was kind of like angry, thinking, man, they really screwed it up. But then when it was, you kind of follow the thought process. Okay, well, there was this event that had happened years before that would have changed the timeline, so you could accept it as not really our Captain Kirk, our Spock. It's a different timeline Spock. So and Kirk. So in that respect, I think you can buy it. I mean, I think it's unfortunate in a way that it doesn't follow the canon, because I would like to see more of like our characters. Because there's a lot of really good people in that movie too, and I thought everything about it pretty much was well done. But so I don't know. Maybe that's just an old Star Trek nerds gripe.
I think a lot of people were divided, weren't they? I mean, a lot of people looked at it, and as you say, you really had to drill that fact. It is an alternative universe into your head. I mean, I really did walk out of there just questioning that, and eventually I decided, okay, I understand it is alternative, and it's not quite following what we've seen so far. I think there's a huge amount of possibilities in terms of building on it for this next movie that's coming out, and there's all sorts of rumours flying about who's going to be in it and what's going to happen. Can you see it following the same sort of path that it did in the 70s, where we had the grand return with the motion picture, and then the Wrath of Khan, of course, went huge, and then eventually we made it to the next generation? Do you think that kind of path will be followed, where we maybe will make it back to TV, or will it stay in the movies? I wonder what would be the long-term outlook.
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, obviously, money's going to play a big part. I mean, ultimately, Paramount and all the other companies, I mean, they're businesses. They got to make money. I think if somebody comes up with a good premise for a show, I think that it could come on. I mean, but it's difficult to say, because I mean, this comes down to people's decisions, people's whether people believe in the project, whether people feel they're going to make money on it. So a lot of factors go into it. I would like to see another show, because I think there's always more to say. I mean, look, like I said, look at the fan films. Obviously, people have a lot more thoughts about Star Trek, and a lot more. I think there's a lot more stories to be told in the universe. It's a very rich universe. So I think that they could do something else.
That's right. I mean, I must say, I did watch the movie, the 2009 Star Trek film, I think 3 times in the cinema, which is a rarity for me. But for some reason, I bought it on Blu-ray, and I haven't watched it on Blu-ray. It's almost like a film you must see in the cinema, if you know what I mean. It just can't be done justice at home,
Well, it was certainly a very visual film, and a lot of effects and a lot of action and stuff like that. So. I mean, it was as a film, and as the way that was directed and what really happened in it was certainly exciting and enjoyable as a film. So, and it was, and definitely it's a big film experience. I mean, these days it's easy to get things on DVD, and now especially where I have you have larger TVs now and stuff like that. I feel less incentive to see a movie at the theater, but certainly that was one you had to see. And anything with really big effects, I'll be more inclined to go see it at the theater. But so that's true.
Indeed, I think, again, the old Star Trek conversation, when you get 2 fans together, it really can run, can't it? And certainly I could talk to you for a lot longer, I know that for sure, Tim. Indeed, I'm going to keep well up to date on the Aurora project, and I know that if anything goes on, I'll certainly try and hook up and contact you, and we'll have a chat with what goes forward in the future. Certainly, I'd love to even have a chat with you about Star Trek again. But for now, Tim, I'd like to say thanks very much for coming on. It's been a pleasure to indeed watch Aurora, and I want to recommend once again that everybody go and check out, it's auroratrek.com. You'll find your way to the episodes from there. And indeed, congratulations on a fantastic piece of work.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.